From Ruin to Wealth. Introduction. What if I told you that one single word, just one, could silence every anxious thought, dissolve fear at its root, and open the invisible gates through which miracles enter? For centuries, mystics have searched for a key that could bypass the mind's defenses, the ceaseless logic that questions, doubts, and cancels every prayer before it reaches the infinite. Florence Scovel Shinn, one of the pioneers of metaphysical law, hinted that this key was hidden not in effort, but in utter certainty, in a single vibration capable of quieting the conscious mind and commanding the subconscious to obey divine order. That word exists. It is older than fear, stronger than reason, and lighter than sound. When spoken with conviction, it transforms confusion into clarity and turns resistance into flow. It doesn't plead, it doesn't beg, it declares. It is inexpugnable, the word that means unconquerable. To speak is to step into a fortress that nothing external can breach. Within its vibration, failure cannot reach you because doubt itself finds no doorway in. This is not superstition, it is alignment with the highest law of creation, the law that says your world mirrors the state of your inner world. This is the secret Florence taught in quiet New York parlors a century ago, the same principle that shaped miracles in ordinary lives. When the mind stops arguing and the word speaks, reality obeys. So tonight, as the noise of the world fades, you are invited to remember what your soul has always known, that your peace is power, your faith is structure, and your word is law. And that one word, inexpugnable, is enough to remake your world. Episode 1. The word the mind cannot block. The mind repeats the same words every day. I can't, I don't know how, it's too late. It builds walls with phrases, stones of thought stacked one on top of another until we no longer see the horizon that was once wide open before us. Florence Scovel Shinn once said that the world is a mirror of your inner speech, and if the mirror is cracked with doubt, even heaven cannot reflect your light clearly. Tonight, you are going to learn a word that does not argue, that does not ask, that does not doubt. A word that silences the mind's endless noise and makes reality obey. You have probably repeated affirmations before, hundreds of them. I am prosperous. I am healthy. I am loved. You said them with sincerity, even with faith. Yet something in you felt unconvinced, as if a quiet guard inside whispered, "That's not true." That guard is the logical mind. Its duty is to protect what it already knows, even if what it knows is a limitation. It hates the unknown more than it loves the good. Every time you declare something greater than your current condition, that guard raises a sword and asks, "How?" And when you cannot answer, the affirmation dies at the gate. Not because it lacked truth, but because it lacked authority. In the early 1900s, Florence taught that authority is not force, it is coherence. The universe does not respond to words alone, but to the vibration behind them. A word filled with doubt is just sound, but a word anchored in certainty becomes law. She called these divine decrees. Unlike prayers that beg, decrees declare. They do not seek, they assume. They do not request. They command reality by aligning with it. But how can one bypass the guard of reason, the voice that says this is impossible, and make the decree reach the deeper realm where creation truly happens? That is why this word was revealed. It is a word so foreign to the ordinary mind that it slips past the guard unnoticed. It defines a state rather than an event, an identity rather than a wish. The old metaphysicians called it a password of power, the sound of completion embodied in a single term. Its meaning is impossible to conquer, a fortress the enemy cannot enter, a peace that cannot be shaken. The word is inexpugnable. Say it softly. Do not rush it. Let each syllable fall like a seal upon your thoughts. Inexpugnable. Feel how the mind pauses, unsure whether it should analyze or surrender. It cannot translate it into a limitation because it carries no familiar association of failure or fear. The mind hesitates, and in that hesitation, the decree passes through. That moment of stillness is the doorway. Now write it. Take a pen and mark the page slowly. Inexpugnable. Do not decorate it. Just make it real, physical, present before your eyes. Then whisper, "My world and my affairs are inexpugnable." You are not convincing yourself of safety. You are commanding your reality into coherence. You are speaking not to the mind that doubts, but to the field that obeys. Florence would tell her students, "Never ask for what you already have in spirit. Speak as if it were so, and it will be." The moment you decree, the law begins to rearrange circumstances to match your inner stance. A phone call, an encounter, a coincidence, these are the outer ripples of an inner command. But there is always resistance at first. The old agreements echo back. The mind reasserts control and fear returns. When that happens, do not fight it. Name it. Then return to your word. Inexpugnable. Each repetition is not superstition. It is realignment. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine your life as a city, every street filled with the traffic of thoughts. Some streets are clean and open, others are crowded with worry. Now see a light rising from the center, a dome of calm expanding until it touches the edges of every district. Over the gates of that city, one word glows: inexpugnable. No thought of defeat can enter. No rumor of fear can survive within. That is what this word does. It creates a perimeter of certainty around your energy. It does not repel life, it clarifies it. Some students of Florence reported remarkable transformations after practicing this simple decree. A lost opportunity returning. A payment appears without explanation. An illness is subsiding. To the logical mind, these were coincidences, but Florence saw them as the natural consequence of alignment. She would say, "When you cease to resist, miracles rush in, for they were never far away, only waiting for permission to exist." Try a small ritual tonight. 3 movements, simple and profound. First, write the word inexpugnable once more. Second, declare aloud, "My world and my affairs are inexpugnable." Third, act as if it were already true. That action may be as small as sending the message you avoided, cleaning a corner of your room, or taking the first step toward the thing you feared. Do it not to prove faith, but to express it. The universe reads movement as belief. And then, throughout the day, whenever fear rises, speak the word again. You do not need to shout. Whisper it, even silently. Let it vibrate through your chest like a bell struck once, and still resonating long after the sound fades. The more you use it, the more it becomes part of your energetic vocabulary, the secret signature of your consciousness. Inexpugnable is not a word you use. It becomes the atmosphere you live in. If you wonder what happens if nothing changes in 24 hours, understand this. Sometimes the miracle arrives disguised as peace. The external event may take time, but the internal shift is instant. The first sign of transformation is not the check in the mail or the phone call. It is the end of the argument in your head. When that happens, you are already in the new vibration. The outer must follow, because reality is obedient to inner law. The principle is ancient and simple. Asking affirms distance, decreeing affirms possession. When you ask, you tell the universe, "I lack." When you decree, you tell it, "I am." The former speaks from separation, the latter speaks from unity. The word inexpugnable erases the gap between those two voices. It names the position of unshakable certainty. It tells the mind, "You no longer need to figure this out, because it is already done." Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, repeat it once more. Inexpugnable. Let it echo softly in the corridors of your subconscious until it settles in the quiet center of your being. Tomorrow, when you wake, speak it again, before your feet touch the floor. And if during the day the old thoughts return, worry, doubt, fatigue, speak it once more. Each repetition reinforces the fortress. You are not fighting the mind. You are teaching it a new language. This is not a suggestion. It is creation. When the mind is silent, the word speaks, and what it speaks becomes flesh. The old mystics knew this. Every decree is a seed planted in the invisible, and when the soil of belief is firm, The harvest is certain. You are not forcing faith, you are embodying it. The word does not convince, it commands through coherence. Ask yourself quietly before this day ends, what part of my life needs to become inexpugnable? Is it my health, my peace, my love, my work? Choose one. Name it once, then leave it. Do not look for signs as proof. Live as if the proof already exists. The proof is the peace you feel. The rest will follow. In the next chapter of this story, you will hear about a man who had nothing left but 24 hours and this single word. His name was Arthur. When the world closed in and reason told him there was no escape, he spoke the word that the mind cannot block. What happened after is not folklore. It is the demonstration of divine law in motion. He learned, as you will, that what is inexpugnable cannot fall. Now, as the sound fades and the screen darkens, keep the word alive within you. Inexpugnable. It belongs to no language, no creed, no age. It belongs to the part of you that already knows the outcome. Let the night carry it deep into your mind, and when the morning light returns, speak it once again, not as hope, but as fact. Because from this moment on, your world and your affairs are, in every sense of the word, inexpugnable. Episode 2. Arthur's Trial. The world can collapse quietly. Sometimes it happens without thunder or warning, just a letter slipped under the door, a voice on the phone, a number on a page. For Arthur, it began with a knock, a hand against the wood, 3 dull taps that carried the weight of an ending. He already knew what it was before opening it. The landlord stood there, polite but firm, holding an envelope that might as well have been a verdict. "You have 24 hours, he said. Arthur thanked him. That was his way. The politeness that lingers even when your life is burning down. He closed the door and stood still, listening to the silence afterward, the kind that fills the room like smoke. Everything he owned was there. A chair, a typewriter, a small painting of a woman whose face he could no longer look at without pain. On the table, a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. He had no money left. His commissions had stopped. The letters he had written to clients were unanswered. His pockets, like his spirit, were empty. He sat and stared at the typewriter keys as though they might spell his salvation. But no words came. Only the mind, the whispering, scolding, calculating. He had read Florence Scovel Shinn's little red book months earlier, back when things were already beginning to break. He remembered her strange, calm certainty. How she wrote that the universe was obedient, that life was not chaos but mirrored thought. At the time he had smiled, half believing, half dismissing. It sounded beautiful, but beauty doesn't pay the rent. Now, as the walls seemed to close in, those same words returned, persistent and unwanted. He took the worn book from his shelf. On the inside cover, he had underlined one line. Every delay is perfect. Every denial is divine protection. He read it over and over, but the sentence felt cruel. Delay, protection. He needed food. He needed rent. He needed time, not philosophy. He dropped the book on the table and covered his face with both hands. The logical mind began its chant again. You have failed. You are finished. You should beg, borrow, and compromise. The voice of fear has perfect timing. It always speaks when you are weakest. Then something strange happened. As he sat there, exhausted by his own thoughts, the room shifted slightly, not outwardly but inwardly. He became aware of another voice, one that didn't shout. It was calm, almost impersonal, and it said just one word. Inexpugnable. Arthur froze. He knew the word from Florence's lecture notes, an odd, almost military word she had described as a divine decree. But he had never spoken it aloud. Now it appeared in his mind with a kind of authority that silenced all other noise. He whispered it. Inexpugnable. The word felt foreign on his tongue, like the name of a country he had once belonged to but forgotten. He said it again, slower this time, tasting it as if it contained something sacred. The mind tried to interrupt him. Stop this nonsense. You need a plan, Rewire. But the word drowned it out. He stood and said it once more, louder now. My world and my affairs are inexpugnable. The walls did not tremble, the ceiling did not open, but something in him shifted, like a lock clicking into place. The despair did not vanish, but it lost its center. It no longer ruled him. For the next hour, Arthur did nothing but walk around the small apartment, repeating the word. He wrote it on scraps of paper and pinned them above the door, the mirror, the window. The room began to look like a shrine. Every time fear spoke, he replied with the word, not in defiance but in calm certainty, as if answering a child's question. By nightfall, a strange peace had settled over him. He realized he was no longer calculating solutions. The mind, his old accountant of doom, had gone quiet. He ate a small piece of bread, drank water, and sat by the window watching the last line of daylight fade behind the buildings. In the silence that followed, he said one final time, "My world and my affairs are inexpugnable." Then, without knowing why, he prepared a letter, one he had written months ago and never mailed. It was addressed to an art dealer who had once admired his work but declined to buy. He sealed it and, following a quiet inner impulse, left the apartment and dropped it in the postbox at the corner. That night, he slept without fear for the first time in months. There were no dreams, only a deep, luminous stillness, the kind that feels less like sleep and more like a return. At dawn, a sound woke him, the telephone ringing. He hesitated, then answered. On the other end was the dealer's secretary. Her voice was crisp but warm. "Mr. Layton received your letter this morning. He wants to buy 2 of your paintings. Could you deliver them today?" Arthur sat there, silent, gripping the receiver. He asked, almost whispering, "Did you say today?" She confirmed it. The amount offered was more than enough to pay the rent and his debts. It was, in fact, the exact figure he had imagined when he used to calculate what he would need to be free. He hung up the phone and laughed, not with joy yet, but with disbelief that was already turning into awe. He looked around the small apartment, at the papers on the wall, at the single word written over and over. He whispered, "So this is how it works." Later that afternoon, as he carried the paintings down the stairwell, he noticed something new in his body. His steps were slower but lighter, as if gravity itself had eased its hold. The mind remained silent, humbled by what it could not explain. Florence once said that faith is not emotion but poise. To declare something inexpugnable is not to demand a miracle. It is to stand so still in the center of truth that the miracle must form around you. Arthur had not begged, strategized, or pleaded. He had simply stood in the vibration of certainty long enough for reality to catch up. When he returned home that evening, the sunlight lay across the table in golden strips. He placed the envelope of money next to the book that had started it all. For a long time he said nothing. Then he whispered, "Thank you, not to the book nor the word, but to the invisible intelligence that had heard him before he even spoke." And somewhere beyond the limits of thought, that intelligence whispered back, "You never had to convince us. You only had to remember who commands." Arthur didn't tell many people what happened. When he did, they nodded politely, as one does when hearing something too simple to be real. But those who had known the tremor of despair in his voice before and the serenity after could see it. The miracle was not in the money. It was in the transformation of his posture toward life, from pleading to decree, from fear to order. There are moments when the world tests the weight of your faith, not to destroy it but to refine it. Arthur's trial was not punishment, it was an invitation. The eviction notice, the empty room, the silence, all of it conspired to push him past reason, into that sacred space where words become law. What happened to him in those 24 hours is not extraordinary. It is lawful. The universe moves where belief is absolute, and once a person stands within that fortress of consciousness, nothing outside can breach it. Tomorrow you will see what Florence called the law of no resistance, the principle that turned Arthur's surrender into manifestation. For the mind will always ask, "Should I fight or flee?" But the word, calm and unhurried, always answers, "Neither. Stand still, for what is inexpugnable cannot be conquered." Episode 3. The Law of No Resistance. When the miracle has already happened, the mind rushes in to claim credit. It wants to explain, to measure, to reduce mystery to method. But Florence Scovel Shinn would smile gently and say, "The law was fulfilled. That is all." Arthur tried to understand it too, pacing his apartment, replaying every step of those 24 hours. Was it a chance? Coincidence? Providence? He could not tell. What he did know was that something inside him had shifted long before the telephone rang. The external event, the sale, the money, was merely the echo of an inner surrender that had taken place the night before. He sat by the window, the city moving beneath him, and remembered how peace had arrived the moment he stopped fighting. That, he realized later, was the hidden mechanism behind every miracle, the law of no resistance. Most people believe they are defeated by circumstances, but in truth, they are defeated by their own friction. They wrestle with reality, clench their will around every problem, and call that struggle faith. Yet faith is never a fist. It is an open hand. The universe cannot place anything in a hand that is closed. Arthur had tried to force his life to obey plans drawn by fear, letters, bargains, calculations, but the current of divine law will not run through tangled wires. It flows only through surrender. Florence once said, "Nothing on earth can resist a man who does not resist." At first, that sounds like weakness, but it is the highest form of power. To resist is to push against life's movement. To yield is to align with it. Water carves canyons not by force, but by unwavering flow. Arthur began to see how every failure in his past had come from inner opposition. Each time he had doubted, he had unknowingly placed a stone in the path of his own supply. When he uttered inexpugnable that night, he hadn't forced faith, he had stepped aside. The mind, bewildered by a word it couldn't categorize, had fallen silent. Into that silence the higher law rushed in. He opened Florence's book again. This time the words seemed to breathe. "Your only enemy is the doubt you entertain." He smiled. He had always thought enemies were outside. Competition, misfortune, injustice. Now he understood that resistance had worn his own face all along. Later that week, he met Florence again in one of her quiet afternoon classes. The room smelled faintly of roses and old paper. She stood by the window, hands folded, her eyes radiant with the kind of calm that makes noise dissolve. When the small group had settled, she began speaking, not in grand sermons, but in phrases that felt carved from light. "Some of you," she said, "still believe the word is a weapon. You use it to fight, to push, to demand. But the word is not a sword, it is a key. When you decree, you unlock. And when you unlock, you do not shout at the door. You simply turn the handle and walk through." Arthur listened, remembering the stillness that had taken over him that night. He realized he had not forced anything. He had not begged, reasoned, or negotiated with life. He had let go. And in that letting go, divine order had taken over. Florence looked at the group and continued. "To resist is to affirm the power of the thing you fear. What you fight, you feed. What you bless, you release. The moment you bless what seems against you, it loses all authority. The word inexpugnable is not a barricade against the world. It is the recognition that you cannot be conquered because you no longer oppose." Her words fell into Arthur's heart like stones sinking into clear water. He saw his old life as a field of tiny battles, each worry, each complaint, each moment of self-defense, every one of them a thread of resistance tying him to the very conditions he wanted to escape. Now he understood why peace had felt like power, because peace was alignment. He left the class and walked through the city with new eyes. Everywhere he looked, he saw resistance disguised as ambition, men shouting into telephones, women clutching lists, faces furrowed with the strain of constant striving. The world was built on the myth that effort equals progress, but he could feel something deeper beneath the noise, a rhythm moving through all things, waiting to carry those who stopped swimming against it. That evening he wrote in his journal, "The world changes when I cease to wrestle with it. I do not push, I allow. I do not command. I consent to divine law." He drew a small circle around the word allow, and under it wrote again, inexpugnable, as if to remind himself that allowing is not weakness. It is the calm of the fortress that needs no wall. The next morning, a new opportunity arrived. An old client, long silent, reached out with an invitation for a commission. The terms were generous, the timing perfect. Arthur accepted, but this time without the feverish gratitude of a beggar. He simply said yes, as though the universe were continuing a conversation that had never paused. Days passed, and life moved with an ease he had never known. He noticed how each small act, walking, painting, speaking, felt guided by something beyond him, as if invisible hands were arranging everything. The word inexpugnable had become less a mantra and more a frequency humming beneath every moment. One night, while painting, he realized he no longer feared losing it all again. The fear of loss is the ultimate resistance, the anchor that keeps most souls in shallow waters. But now he knew, nothing truly his could ever be taken, and nothing taken could ever truly have been his. The law of no resistance had freed him not only from lack, but from possession itself. He closed his eyes and whispered, "What is mine by divine right comes easily and joyfully." The phrase rose from the depths like a prayer older than his body. He could almost feel Florence's smile somewhere in the unseen, her quiet affirmation, "Yes, that is the law." For the first time he understood that inexpugnable was not meant to build walls against life, but to remove the inner walls that kept life out. It was the consciousness of perfect safety, the knowing that there is nothing to defend, nothing to chase, nothing to fear. He thought of all those years of struggle, of trying to control the uncontrollable. It was never a lack of effort that kept him trapped. It was a lack of surrender. The mind had believed survival depended on resistance. The spirit knew creation depended on trust. And so when people asked later how he turned his fortune, Arthur never spoke of the check or the dealer or the timing. He would only smile and say, "When I stopped resisting, everything stopped resisting me." Florence would write about him later, not by name, but as an example of what happens when a man ceases to fight his own good. She called it the miracle of compliance. Though there was nothing miraculous about it. It was law, simple, exact, inevitable. And if you listen closely, you will hear that same law whispering through your own life. It waits at the edge of every struggle, patient, unhurried, repeating its eternal invitation. Stand still, bless what comes, resist nothing, and all things will serve you. Arthur learned that night what many never do, that heaven does not reward effort, it responds to alignment. And alignment begins the moment you trust that what is for you has already been decreed. In the next episode, you will see how that decree becomes visible, the moment when thought crystallizes into form. For the law of no resistance opens the way, but the act of faith sets the miracle in motion. And faith, Florence said, is never belief without evidence. It is action without hesitation. Arthur's next step will show that truth, how a single gesture, made in quiet certainty, can summon the material world into obedience. For what is inexpugnable in spirit must, by law, become visible in time. Episode 4. The Manifestation. The next morning the city awoke beneath a silver mist. The world seemed gentler somehow, as if it too had paused to breathe. Arthur walked through the narrow streets with his portfolio under his arm, the same streets that only a week ago had felt hostile and heavy. Today they felt alive. The same stones that once echoed his despair now seemed to hum with quiet recognition, as though the world itself was aware of his transformation. He had learned that when one aligns with divine law, everything, air, color, movement, shifts subtly to meet that new vibration. He was not rushing anymore, not forcing the day to deliver its proof. He had stopped asking life to justify his faith. His step was unhurried, his gaze steady, his heart a still lake beneath the surface of sound. When he arrived at the art dealer's office, the secretary greeted him with an enthusiasm that felt almost rehearsed, as if the scene had been written long before either of them arrived to play their roles. The dealer, Mr. Layton, examined the paintings in silence. Arthur waited without anxiety. There was nothing to win, nothing to lose. He stood in the consciousness of one who already possesses. Finally, Mr. Layton turned and said, "You've captured something new here, something alive." He named his price, generous, far beyond Arthur's expectation. But Arthur did not react. The calm within him was absolute. He accepted it with a nod, as though hearing what he had already declared inwardly. The outer simply mirrored the decree spoken days earlier. My world and my affairs are inexpugnable. As he walked home with the signed papers and deposit in hand, the world seemed to move differently. People smiled without reason. The rhythm of his footsteps matched the rhythm of something larger, invisible but present. He realized that what had happened was not a miracle that broke the rules. It was the rules themselves revealed. When he reached his apartment, he sat in front of the window and watched the sunlight fall across the table. Everything looked ordinary, and yet nothing was. The cup, the chair, even the dust on the windowsill, all of it shimmered with a subtle significance. He understood now that divinity does not descend from the sky in thunderous gestures. It unfolds quietly through the geometry of natural law. The so-called supernatural is simply the natural, rightly understood. He opened Florence's book once more and read aloud, "Speak the word, and then act as though you have faith in your own decree. The law of faith requires expression." He realized he had already done that without knowing it. Dropping the letter into the mailbox had not been random. It was an act of faith disguised as impulse. Every time he had said inexpugnable, the unseen had adjusted itself accordingly, aligning circumstances to meet the vibration of that word. The world had responded not to his plea, but to his position. It became clear to him now. When one decrees, the substance of reality begins to crystallize around that decree. Thought condenses into vibration, vibration into form. The moment you release resistance, life rearranges itself to match the frequency of your conviction. This is the law that governs manifestation. It does not require strain, only alignment. It is exact, impartial, and immediate in proportion to your inner certainty. Arthur leaned back and let the truth settle in him. He understood that everything that had appeared against him had actually been working for him. The eviction notice had not been punishment. It had been a catalyst. The loss, the fear, the silence, all of them had forced him into surrender, stripping him of his last illusions of control. Only in that emptiness could the law flow freely. He had not earned the miracle. He had allowed it. Days turned into weeks, and the quiet current of prosperity continued. Commissions appeared without effort, and people he thought had forgotten him reached out unexpectedly. His name began to circulate in places he had never entered. It was as though invisible hands had taken his life and rewritten its script. But through it all he remained calm, even detached, for he knew that attachment is the subtle twin of fear. The goal was not to accumulate, but to remain in coherence with divine order. The more he trusted, the more life expanded. One afternoon, as he worked on a new painting, Florence visited. She entered the room with the quiet poise that always preceded her words. Arthur showed her the new piece, a depiction of a lone figure standing on a mountain, surrounded by golden light that seemed to emerge from within rather than from the sun. She looked at it for a long time before speaking. "This," she said softly, "is what the soul looks like when it remembers its authority. The light is not given, it is revealed." Arthur smiled. "So it was never about the paintings," he said. Florence shook her head. "It never is. The art, the work, the form, these are mirrors. The real creation is always invisible first. You did not manifest money, Arthur. You manifested coherence." He understood. The miracle had not been the sale, nor the timing, but the harmony between inner and outer. His thoughts, emotions, and actions had finally stopped contradicting one another. He was no longer a divided being begging for unity. He had become unity itself. Florence touched the frame of the painting. "There will come more tests," she said, "not to take away what you have, but to deepen your knowing. The law repeats its lessons until it becomes nature." He nodded. "I don't fear the tests anymore," he replied. "I know what cannot be conquered cannot be lost." Her smile deepened. "Then you have learned what most never do, that peace is the evidence of power." That evening, after she left, Arthur sat in the dim light, reflecting on her words. He realized that true manifestation was not about summoning things into existence, but about aligning oneself with the level of consciousness where those things already are. He had not changed his destiny. He had simply tuned into it. He looked out the window, where the first stars had appeared, each one shining with precise order. He felt that same order pulsing in his veins. He whispered the word once more, not from need, but from reverence. Inexpugnable. The sound seemed to vanish into the air and yet remain, vibrating silently like a promise fulfilled. In that moment, he felt gratitude, not as an emotion, but as awareness. Gratitude was the recognition that nothing had ever been missing, that the divine had always been surrounding him, waiting for his surrender to open the gate. The days that followed unfolded with the quiet rhythm of inevitability. Opportunities flowed, but Arthur's focus had shifted from receiving to radiating. He no longer measured success by what came to him, but by what moved through him. His art changed. Each painting became less a depiction of form and more an expression of light, as though the canvases themselves were translating unseen frequencies into color. People began to say his work carried something beyond beauty, though few could name what it was. Arthur knew it was the resonance of the word made visible. He often recalled Florence's teaching. Faith without emotion is dead, but emotion without peace is chaos. He had found the middle path between stillness and fire, the serenity that creates. The miracle was no longer an event, but a state. One evening, while walking along the river, he stopped and watched the reflection of the city lights tremble on the surface of the water. He saw in them the pattern of his own journey, turbulence giving way to clarity. The river resisted nothing. It simply carried the light it received. He smiled, realizing that he too had become like that river, transparent, receptive, effortlessly guided by the invisible current of divine law. Florence's words echoed in his mind. "Speak the word. Act as though and rest in divine certainty." He whispered softly, "And the word becomes flesh." The night deepened. He turned back toward home, his heart steady, his steps aligned with the rhythm of the universe. He was no longer trying to control life. He was letting life paint through him. He had learned the true meaning of manifestation, that heaven is not a place we reach, it is a state we allow. And somewhere, far beyond the city and the stars, a quiet voice, the same voice that had first whispered inexpugnable, spoke again in the stillness of his heart. The law is fulfilled. But the story was not yet finished. There was one final revelation waiting, one last truth Florence would leave him with, a truth about the living practice of the word and how to keep the light alive when the world grows dark again. "That," she said, "is the real secret, and it begins where miracles end." Episode 5. The Practice of the Word. Time passed gently. The world outside continued its rhythm. People hurried through the streets. Deals were made and broken. Hearts opened and closed. But Arthur had entered another rhythm entirely, one that pulsed beneath appearances. He had stopped chasing signs and started embodying them. The extraordinary had become ordinary, and in that ordinariness, the sacred revealed itself. He saw now that the word, inexpugnable, was not meant to be kept on a piece of paper or whispered only in crisis. It was a state of being, a frequency to live inside. Florence had told him once, to practice the word is not to repeat it endlessly, but to become it. He had not understood her then, but life itself had become his teacher. Every experience, every challenge was a question asking, are you still standing in the fortress, or have you stepped outside to fight the wind? In those quiet months, Arthur learned to practice the word the way a musician practices silence, the pauses that make melody possible. He began each morning not with prayer, but with awareness. He would rise before dawn, when the world was still half asleep, and watch the first light spill across the horizon. It was in those moments of stillness that he felt closest to the source, the vast intelligence that moved through all things. He would close his eyes and say, "I am within the fortress. Nothing external has power over me." And peace would return, not as comfort, but as command. The practice of the word was not about escaping the world. It was about entering it without being consumed by it. It meant paying bills, meeting people, walking through storms, all with the same inner poise, meeting people, walking through storms, all with the same inner poise. Florence had called it living under grace, acting in the visible while rooted in the invisible. "You will know you are practicing the word," she had said, "when nothing external determines your internal weather." Arthur began to notice that the more he lived this way, the less he needed to speak the word at all. The fortress was no longer a wall he built in defense. It was an atmosphere that followed him. He could walk through noise, criticism, temptation, and still feel untouched. It was not indifference, it was mastery. When the mind is no longer reactive, it becomes creative. And creation, he realized, is the natural state of a soul aligned with divine order. He painted differently now. He no longer planned his compositions. He allowed them. Colors met by intuition, shapes formed without effort. His art no longer portrayed what he saw, it revealed what he knew. And what he knew was that beauty was not decoration, it was evidence. Evidence of a mind in harmony with its source. To make something beautiful, Florence had said, is to agree with God. Yet the practice of the word was not without its tests. One evening, as autumn came and the air grew cold, Arthur received another letter. This time it was from a bank, a clerical error, they claimed, a lost payment, a missing document, a potential dispute. For a brief moment, the old fear returned, the familiar tightening in his chest, the mind whispering its old refrain, "It's happening again." He stood by the window, letter in hand, watching the wind shake the branches outside. The temptation to panic was strong, but then he remembered the fortress. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. "My world and my affairs are inexpugnable," he said softly, not as a desperate plea, but as a reminder. He placed the letter on the table and walked away from it. That night, he slept in peace. The next day, the issue was resolved by itself. The bank apologized for its mistake. It was then he understood that the true power of the word was not in making miracles happen, it was in making fear impossible. Once fear loses its hold, life moves naturally toward order. What we call miracles are simply the natural consequences of fearless consciousness. Florence visited him again that winter. Her hair had turned more silver, but her presence was still radiant. She entered his studio quietly, observing the paintings that now covered every wall, visions of light emerging from shadow, forms dissolving into color, faces illuminated from within. She smiled and said, "You've stopped painting matter. You're painting vibration." Arthur laughed softly. "Or perhaps vibration paints me," he said. She nodded. "Then you've understood the secret. The word does not belong to you. You belong to it. You are the instrument, not the player. When you are empty enough, it plays itself through you." He asked her, "How does one keep the word alive when the world grows dark again?" Florence looked out the window, where snow had begun to fall, the flakes glimmering like fragments of light. "You remember," she said. "That's all. The world will test your memory again and again. Each challenge will ask, 'Have you forgotten who you are?' The practice is remembrance. Every time you choose peace over panic, trust over doubt, gratitude over complaint, you remember, and remembering is prayer without words." She turned to face him. "The fortress is not built once. It is built daily, with thought, with silence, with faith. And one day you will no longer need to build it, because you will realize you were never outside it." After she left, Arthur sat by the fire and thought about her words. The flames flickered like living thoughts, rising and vanishing into the air. He saw in them the pattern of life itself, creation and release, rise and return. He realized that the practice of the word was the same, to create without clinging, to love without fear, to live without defense. Every thought was a spark. Every choice is a decree. He wrote in his journal that night, "The word is not a command to the universe. It is a revelation of its order. To speak it is to join the music already playing." Years later, his paintings would hang in galleries, admired for their strange serenity. Critics called them mystical. Collectors said they brought calm to the rooms they entered. But Arthur knew the truth. It was not art that changed the atmosphere, it was consciousness. The same word that had saved him from despair now radiated quietly through every brushstroke. He never became wealthy, at least not in the way the world measures wealth, but his life overflowed with a subtler abundance, timely provisions, harmonious encounters, peace that no circumstance could disturb. He moved through the years like a man carried by an invisible current, and when he was asked near the end of his life what the secret had been, he smiled and said, "The secret is no secret. It is the law. Speak the word, act as though, and rest, because what is inexpugnable cannot be conquered, cannot be lost, and cannot be forgotten." He passed quietly one morning, the light of dawn spilling over his hands, which still held traces of paint. On the easel before him, an unfinished canvas shimmered faintly in the early light. It depicted a vast horizon, with a single word written across the sky: soft, golden, eternal, inexpugnable. People who saw it later said it seemed to glow from within. Some called it a masterpiece, others a mystery, but those who truly looked at it felt something deeper, a presence, a vibration, a whisper reminding them of their own forgotten fortress. And perhaps that is the real practice of the word, not to repeat it endlessly, but to become a living demonstration of its truth. To walk through life knowing that no fear, no loss, no darkness can conquer the consciousness that stands in divine order. For the word was never meant to stay in books or prayers. It was meant to become flesh, to live, to breathe through those who remember. And as long as one soul still stands within that sacred awareness, the world itself remains redeemable. And if you listen closely, beyond your thoughts, beneath the noise, you may still hear it, that quiet, radiant whisper repeating through the fabric of creation, calling you home to your own divine certainty, inexpugnable. Epilogue, the fortress of light. There are words that belong to time, and there are words that belong to eternity. Most words are born from need, from fear, from the trembling desire to control what we do not understand. But a few, very few, are born from truth itself. They are not invented, they are remembered. Inexpugnable is one of those words. Long after Arthur's passing, the story of his 24-hour miracle circulated quietly among those who sought Florence Scovel Shinn's teachings. Some treated it as legend, others as proof of the law. Yet those who understood saw something deeper. The miracle was not the sale, not the money, not the timing. It was the moment a human being remembered his own divine nature and refused to let fear name his world again. The rest was inevitable. Florence would continue to teach until her final years, her calm voice echoing through small rooms filled with students hungry for certainty. She reminded them that the word was not magic but alignment, not superstition but law. "You do not use the word to escape the world," she would say. "You use it to redeem it." For the true fortress is not built to hide from life. It is built to let life pass through without harm. The centuries have changed, but the human mind has not. It still doubts what it cannot see, still builds prisons out of logic and calls them safety. Yet the invitation remains the same as it was in Arthur's day, to remember that faith is not emotion. It is structure. It is the invisible architecture upon which reality is built. To stand within that architecture is to live beyond fear. Every age gives new names to the same power: vibration, frequency, alignment, divine order. Science calls it energy. Mystics call it law. But whatever the name, the principle does not change. What you decree, you become. What you believe, you emit. And what you emit, the universe mirrors without hesitation. Arthur's story, though simple, is the story of all who awaken. It begins in the ruins of self-reliance, when logic fails, when plans collapse, When the noise of the world grows unbearable, in that silence the soul begins to listen. It hears, faintly at first, the echo of a truth older than the stars, that nothing external has power over the one who remembers their source. That is the moment the fortress rises, not around you but within you. You may never need to say the word aloud, but you will know when it has found you. You will feel it in the stillness that follows a storm, in the calm that no explanation can disturb. It will whisper through you when you are tempted to panic and remind you that peace is the highest demonstration of strength. It will not beg, it will not argue, it will simply be. Florence once wrote, "The invisible walls of faith are stronger than iron." Perhaps that was what Arthur discovered, that the true fortress is built not of denial, but of remembrance. To declare something inexpugnable is to withdraw all permission for fear to dictate your reality. It is to look at the chaos of the world and say, without defiance but with quiet knowing, you have no jurisdiction here. And so, every generation finds its own Arthurs, men and women standing at the edge of despair, holding a single word like a torch against the darkness. Some call it prayer, others affirmation, but at its core, it is the same eternal act, the reclaiming of divine authority. The moment you stop fighting and start declaring, the world rearranges itself in obedience to your peace. If you are listening to this now, perhaps the law is calling you as it once called him. Perhaps something in you is ready to stop negotiating with fear and begin speaking with power. You need not understand how the miracle will unfold. Understanding belongs to the mind, but fulfillment belongs to the law. Your task is only to stand inside the word, to let its vibration shape your posture, your tone, your choices, until your life itself becomes a decree. One day, you too will look back and realize that every detour was divine architecture, every delay a corridor leading you deeper into alignment. The world will call it a coincidence. You will know it as precision. And when doubt comes, as it surely will, remember this. You do not have to fight the darkness. You only have to stand where the light already is. Speak the word, and then live as though heaven had already answered. Because it has. The fortress was never built outside you. It was always the radiant center of your being, waiting for you to recognize it. And when you finally do, when you speak from that place of unshakable peace, the universe will echo back its only possible response. So be it. The word is fulfilled, inexpugnable.